Okay, let's unpack this. We're taking a deep dive today into a set of sources you've shared about an upcoming game. Seems like it's really getting people talking online.
Yeah, absolutely. This dive is all about looking at the game's concept, where it came from, according to
Mhm.
the sources, and, the reactions it's sparking. The basic idea, it's a high-tech heist game.
A heist game, okay.
Yeah, focused on reclaiming cultural artifacts. That's the core.
And the sources mention something pretty specific as inspiration, right? Something about a statistic.
That's right. The developers apparently point to a French government report. It estimated that, get this, something like 90% of sub-Saharan African cultural heritage is actually held in Western collections.
The 90%. Wow.
Yeah, and that statistic is positioned as a sort of real-world justification, the backdrop for the game's whole narrative.
So what is the game? It's called Relooted.
Relooted, yeah.
Uh-huh.
Based on what we've seen, it's a puzzle platformer
Mhm.
set in the near future. And in this world, some big treaty that was supposed to return artifacts, it failed. So you play as this crew, kind of like vigilante thieves.
Vigilantes.
Case or where?
Operating out of South Africa,
Yeah.
sources say. And their mission is to steal back these artifacts from institutions, in the West.
Right. Okay, I can already see where this might get complicated. The online discussion reflects that.
Oh, definitely. That's where things get really charged. A huge point that keeps coming up in the sources from people discussing it is what they're calling the optics.
The optics, meaning,
Meaning the choice to have the main characters be Black Africans and their primary activity in the game is, well, stealing.
ah,
And this seems to tap into a sensitive point people raise online, this feeling that sometimes stories about Black characters, maybe especially in Western media, tend to circle back to themes of theft or, racial conflict.
instead of other kinds of stories? Exactly. Rather than just a wider range of narratives.
Hmm.
So the concern you see voiced in these forums is that the game's core concept, the whole proof of concept, feels a bit too much like Africans stealing things.
Even with the historical context.
Yeah, even with that. Critics are saying it feels like it's kind of missing the mark, potentially playing into stereotypes, even if that's not the intention.
Okay, so how did the developers respond? What do the sources say about that?
Well, they defended the concept. They pointed out their own team's diversity, mentioning folks born and raised in Africa are involved.
So they felt the criticism was unfair.
They basically suggested it was a stretch, maybe not coming from a place of good faith. That's the language used in the sources.
And what about how they handled the community feedback itself? There was something about online forums.
Right, that's another layer. The sources indicate the developer was pretty quick to lock discussion threads, places like Steam forums.
Lock them down. How quickly?
Sometimes after just a few replies, apparently. Even from things that seem like, regular game suggestions. Someone
Yeah.
mentioned suggesting a mode where you play as a cop or guard.
And that got shut down too.
Locked quickly, yeah. That's what the report suggests.
Interesting. Were there other specific things people were arguing about?
Yeah, a couple of other points pop up. The title itself, Relooted, people question that. The developer's explanation was that it refers to the museums in the game doing a kind of year looting
Mm-hmm.
by moving artifacts around, not the player's actions.
Oh, okay. A bit of a specific interpretation there. Anything else?
There was also a discussion about the character's skin color. The developer apparently stated the characters are Black because they are African,
Uh-huh.
which then drew criticism from people pointing out, well, the existence of white South Africans, for example.
Mhm.
They felt that explanation was maybe too simplistic about identity in Africa.
Right. So lots of different friction points.
Definitely. So when you look at all this together, the game, the inspiration, the backlash, the developer's reaction, it's more than just about one game, isn't it?
Seems like it.
It really highlights this complex intersection. You've got cultural representation in media, you've got what the creators intend versus how audiences perceive it, and then how these sensitive online discussions unfold, especially around topics tied to history, like artifact repatriation. It gets intense fast.
Yeah, it really does. So thinking about the game's whole premise, that statistic it starts with, and then all these reactions we've talked about. What does this whole situation make you think about the challenges? The challenges of telling diverse stories and just talking about them in media today?